But let me tell you something. Black trans women are being killed in this country. And CNN, you have erased black trans women for the last time. Let me tell you something. Black trans women are dying. Our lives matter. I am an extraordinary black trans woman, and I deserve to be here. My black trans sisters that are here, I am tired. I am so tired. I'm just sitting there, and it's not just my black trans women, it's my black trans brothers too.
Blossom, you're a black trans woman. You have the mic in your hand. I've taken it and given it back to you. We want to hear from you. We have had trans people of color. We've had all people here, and you're welcome. But we are proud and happy that you're here. We're proud and happy that you're here. Yes, but remember, we're on our time constraint. All right. Thank you, Blossom, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's how anti-blackness works amongst people of color. That's what anti-blackness looks like. The erasure of black trans people.
All right.
I'm here. We're here in this room. Please give us that opportunity.
Blossom, thank you so much, and we appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for coming back for another video. I've been spending a lot of time working on improving my editing skills. Yes, I do my own editing. It's stuff I learned at a creative arts focused high school, and no, it wasn't one of those elite types, it was barely government funded. Anyway, I'm going to talk about some things in this video, and my opinions on the matter aren't exactly popular, but they're not baseless either. For it's a special day indeed when I, an anti-feminist, find myself agreeing with feminists. Here's the issue as we see it.
Why you was this just you, or was this part of standing up for women? This is a pressure group you're involved with.
So it's part of standing for women, but it was something I really wanted to do, because I've noticed over the last few years we seem to be losing the word woman. So we might be called cervix havers or menstruators. Well, in cervical cancer campaign material, the word woman doesn't appear. Menstruators, chest feeders, pregnant people, and I just thought the essence of this debate and what we're losing is literally the word woman to mean adult human female.
I looked into this concept a little more and I found this smart-ass article. I think it actually covers the main issues, except one, pretty well, so I decided to use it as a foundation for this video. It begins with a petulant whine about menstruation, but underneath the typical feminist childishness is a real point. Trans activists and social justice warriors are telling us that anyone of any gender can menstruate. Here's some of the propaganda floating around right now.
Hey, Dad.
Yeah, bud?
I think I got my period.
This website is a collection of trans experiences with menstruation. I read through them all, so you don't have to. And the two things they all had in common were they were all women transitioning to or identifying as men. They all attributed their negative feelings about their periods to gender dysphoria. Here's another perspective.
I had a visit from an incredibly very unwelcome guest. I basically got my period for the first time in like nearly 4 years. My name is Jamie Rains and I'm a trans guy who's been on testosterone for a little over 7 years now. And I'm here today to talk to you about what it's like to experience periods as a trans guy. One of the biggest misconceptions is that periods are only experienced by women. But in reality, transgender men are real men. We're just born a little bit different to other guys. And it can be quite hard to navigate having periods as a guy when everything to do with periods is aimed very much towards women and is very like female orientated and all the advertising and packaging and just all of that stuff. I remember the first time I experienced having a period. I can't remember exactly how old I was, but I was like somewhere between 12 and 14. And I just remember it took me completely by shock. Having periods was such a massive source of dysphoria for me. Whenever it happened, I felt completely like frozen and very, very down for the entire time it happened. And whenever I first realized that I'd started my period, it was just a moment of like being stuck on the toilet. I can't move, I don't know what to do, and then just like curling up in bed for the rest of the day, or being mopey if I wasn't able to curl up in bed and just ignore the world. But when I started testosterone, my period stopped, and it was just like this huge weight lifted. It was kind of similar to the happiness and excitement I had when I first noticed like my voice was breaking, or I had like my first chin hair or my first chest hair, that kind of thing.
So they're using a number of different mediums to change our understanding of menstruation from that of an intrinsic biological function to something of a politically correct narrative, one that's centered around the feelings of a select few. And we can see that it is feelings. Menstruating men is not a biological reality. So why are activists trying to convince us that what we all know is wrong? Well, there are several reasons. One, it allows the continuation of the delusion. And two, it gives them power to control reality. Let's move on to the next point. Relabel or erase female body parts. E.g., as a health website recently did, the vagina is now politically incorrect. It must be referred to as the front hole. Breasts may not be mentioned, especially in the context of breastfeeding. The politically correct term is chest feeding, and some men, that is, female to male transgenders, do it too. It is a thought crime to believe that only women can nurse or that breastfeeding is a thing. This was a rather lazy paragraph. Had they done any research, they would have found this article straight from the website in question, which was Healthline. That's right, this one turned out to be false. As for the other examples, there didn't seem to be a whole lot of information, so we might have to chalk this one up to a bit of hysteria, at least for now. Now this one had me completely weirded out. It reminded me of Brave New World. Refused to read it in high school, but now it sits on my bookshelf, so there you go. Here's what I found on this subject. Chest feeding. Some masculine identified trans people use this term to describe the act of feeding their baby from their chest, regardless of whether they've had chest surgery. Don't make assumptions and do not use heteronormative language, Peters says. Instead of directing your child to ask Jamie's mummy, for example, you could say, ask Jamie's adult. The government has asked that the term pregnant women be replaced by pregnant people in a UN treaty to avoid excluding transgender people.
I sat frozen in a hard plastic lecture chair, staring at the blonde nurse speaking at the front of the room. And then Mum pushes the rest of the baby out, she said cheerfully, setting down the baby doll who had been resting in her right arm. I was in shock, mouth agape. She seemed completely unaware of how exclusionary her gendered language was. I reminded myself that the evening wasn't about me. I was attending the prenatal class to support a friend who was 8 months pregnant. Her partner couldn't make it, so I was a stand-in. I wished I could have done a better job, but I was too uncomfortable. Not because of the bloody crowning head I watched emerge from someone's vagina on screen, but because of the language the nurse was using. Everything she said mentioned the mother or woman as a way to describe people who are about to give birth. I considered saying something to her after the class, but by the end of the 2 hours, I just wanted to leave. A lot of my discomfort with parenting lies in its preoccupation with gender. Just the idea of pregnancy brings up intense feelings of body dysphoria, or the feeling that my body doesn't comply with my idea of myself. Between that and stereotypical constructs like pink for girls, blue for boys, and yummy mummy dates, it feels like there is no room for people like me. Framing motherhood as something inextricable from women with uteruses can make non-binary people, trans men and women, cis and trans, who aren't able to conceive children, feel as though we don't count, as though nobody sees us, and our concerns don't matter. Shutting us out of the conversation can make us feel worthless, contributing to the already high rates of depression in our communities.
These are more examples of activists using media to change our understanding of pregnancy and motherhood as something other than intrinsic and biologically based. They've also upped the ante by engaging the shame machine, something they tend to do with this issue a little bit more than the others. Furthermore, they insist their information is proven by science, but they do two sneaky things with that science. One, they twist the truth, and two, they only tell half the story. For example, when they tell us that men can get pregnant too, they're leaving out the other half of the sentence. Men can get pregnant too if they were born women first. So, by telling only half-truths and twisting the narrative, does that count as lying? And their final point, which is a hot issue right now, is about sports. It's another serious issue disguised as a petulant whine. In researching this, I came across this website, and as you can see, it's pretty wordy. It kind of just keeps going. It was written and posted by a guy called Ross. There didn't seem to be any information about him, but he clearly has a background in academia and science somewhere. Anyway, so he summarizes the arguments between the activists and the feminists by referring to them as the red and blue corners with this sentence. The answer is, transgender male to female athletes may retain some degree of biological advantage even after lowering testosterone levels. However, we don't know this for sure, and the size of the theoretical advantage of being biologically male that remains even after lowering the testosterone levels is the contentious issue here. What currently happens policy-wise is that a male to female athlete is allowed to compete only if they show that they've kept their testosterone levels below a certain point. There's a measurement of 10 something or other there. For at least 12 months. This is aimed, in theory, at taking away the advantage enjoyed by biological males. But does it? Could some degree of advantage remain, particularly in sports, where the benefit of testosterone isn't removed by its reduction? If this is the case, namely that some advantage remains even after lowering testosterone, then it would have massive implications for women's sport because it would theoretically allow a sub-elite male to compete as an elite female simply through declaration or self-identification and compliance with the policy.
Before, if a transgender athlete wanted to compete in the Olympics, they had to have sex reassignment surgery, but those rules changed in 2016. They now focus on testosterone levels. There are no restrictions if someone transitions to a man, but if they transition to a woman, they need to take hormone therapy for at least a year in order to be eligible to compete.
The idea that we need to protect women's or female sport from other women and females is itself inherently discriminatory. No testosterone policy will ever work. They should respect an athlete's legally recognized sex or gender.
Simply allowing self-identification as female is not good enough. We cannot allow a situation where all it takes is for someone to say, I'm identifying as female in order to enter women's sport. That would be analogous to what Zuby did, and what some organizations allow and some other people are fighting for, and it would result in the disappearance of women from sport. That's because the performance gap of 10 to 14% is so large that literally thousands of men fit into it. Even if 10% of these men, who aren't quite elite top-of-the-pile athletes, were allowed to enter women's sport with no biological alteration or intervention, then the very best women could quickly be relegated to outside the top 100, even the top 1,000 in some instances. However, supporters of trans athletes say that a biological male will lose all their androgen-derived advantages and enter women's sport at the same place they left men's sport. If this were true, then there'd be little to fret about. It would mean that a 12-month period of compliance would be enough to ensure fairness and that no biological male ever enters women's sport with a theoretically insurmountable advantage. It is, according to its proponents, the current situation, as evidenced by the lack of dominant male-to-female athletes. Ooh, that's awkward. Ross also makes a very serious point about contact sports, as further backed up by Joe Rogan.
Thing that I'm not a real expert in physiology or endocrinology, but I'm a martial arts expert, and I've been doing it my whole life. Like, I know the difference. You guys are out of your mind if you think that a man who has been a man for 30 years and has taken female hormones for 2 is the same. You put Brock Lesnar, chop his dick off and put him in a dress. That guy's going to maul through the women's heavyweight division like nothing you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
Because we're built different, and it's just a fact. And anyone who tries to argue that is crazy. And there was a great article by this board-certified endocrinologist who went over all the things that separate men from women, which should exclude them from competing in combat sports against women. And this woman was called a transphobe, and I mean, she's a fucking endocrinologist, you idiot. She's talking about the science. And she's also talking about the science of, one of the things they talk about is how women, or trans women, once they transition to being a woman, they're basically biologically almost exactly the same as women. She was like, no. Not only that, but the bone density is retained by taking estrogen, which is what the problem with women when they have osteoporosis is. They're losing estrogen, they lose bone mass. Well, the estrogen actually helps you retain bone mass. So when a man transitions to a woman and then starts taking estrogen, it's actually helping retain the bone mass that he would have lost by not having testosterone. And then on top of that, reaction times. Reaction times are several tenths of a second faster in general for women than they are for men rather than they are for even professional athlete women. So all these variables that need to be taken into consideration when you're allowing someone to do a sport. And we're not just talking about bike racing. We're not talking about, something where someone...
Non-contact.
Yeah, we're talking about the most contact. We're talking about fucking fighting.
All this is relevant, but with current policy being testosterone-based, I had to look into that aspect as well. Rosso had a useful little graph in his post showing the difference in testosterone levels in boys and girls. But then after the age of 10, things change. The gap suddenly starts appearing, and by the age of 14, the average gap for these events is 10%. And by 19, not a single one is less than 10%. That's the performance gap that necessitates separation of men and women for sport, and happens because of physiological differences that begin to emerge at puberty. In my other research, I found this information about testosterone levels in adults. While testosterone is essential to both male and female health, it plays a much bigger role in men. Healthy males who've gone through puberty have 20 times the levels of testosterone compared to a healthy female. What it does in men and women. And I think with what little information there is, the answer is very clear. Men who transition to women and compete in women's sports have biological advantages over their peers and competition, and they raise welfare issues in certain sports. So what this all means is, estrogen neither reverses the effects of testosterone, nor does it completely reshape a person. And all of these things have resulted in the slow but steady invasion of women's spaces. It's gone beyond consumer products and sports, right into medicine, awards ceremonies, bathrooms, and women's shelters. We've had several examples of our paranoias being shown not to be fantasy, the most famous being Jessica Yaniv. I think by now it's clear to see that we have a problem, particularly when it comes to sports. We have example after example of experts speaking out only to have their entire lives destroyed. And we have example after example demonstrating how mainstream science, medicine, and academia are being changed to reflect a distorted version of reality. We've seen the activists do this with periods, pregnancy, parenthood, and even breastfeeding. It's an aggressive and jealous hijacking of labels, categories, symbols, and experiences that have always been designated just for women.
It's kind of like, if anyone can identify as a woman, then what is a woman?
Being a woman comes from the core, the soul, not the vessel it's housed in. No amount of estrogen can replicate that. So, what's the solution? Well, some people have suggested a third category, particularly when it comes to sports, but with more and more genders being recognised every day, I don't see that idea gaining traction. But we need to be talking about this. The voices of women should not be silenced to protect the pride of the radical trans activists. Those activists should be shamed for what they've done to the true cause for trans rights. It was never about inclusion, it was about freedom. And now the pendulum is swinging too far, making innocent transgender people more unsafe than ever in terms of retaliation. It's not right, and there has to be another way.